It was March 5th, 1976. Dean Martin was supposed to be on stage at the MGM Grand halfway through his second show. 5,000 people were waiting, the orchestra was waiting, but Dean was here, seated in a velvet booth in the shadows, a glass of amber liquid untouched before him. His hands, usually so steady, so expressive, were perfectly still. He stared past the ice cubes, through the table, into something only he could see. His tuxedo was immaculate, his hair jet black and perfect, but the man inside the suit had already checked out. The phone call had come an hour earlier. A voice from the old world, from the buried world, had spoken a single sentence. And that sentence, 10 words that have never been printed, never been confessed, severed the last thread holding Dean Martin to the person America thought he was. He would walk out of the Polo Lounge, drive to the MGM Grand, and deliver the final performance of his career. Not with a bang, but with a silence so profound it would echo for decades. Because what happened that night wasn't an ending. It was a confession. A silent, screaming confession to a sin Hollywood had helped him hide for 30 years. And tonight, we go back to the beginning, to the moment the real tragedy began, long before the fame, long before the Rat Pack, to the night a boy from Steubenville, Ohio made a deal with a devil who wasn't wearing a suit. To understand the fall, you have to see the height. Rewind the film. The year is 1959. The Sands Hotel, Las Vegas. The Copa Room is electric, a pressurized chamber of anticipation. The air is blue with smoke, glittering with diamonds and the flash of camera bulbs. Every face is turned toward the stage, every breath held. And then he appears, Dean Martin, not walking but gliding, a glass in hand, a smile that says he knows a secret you don't. He doesn't so much perform as inhabit a state of sublime, effortless cool. The voice, that warm, bourbon-soaked baritone, wraps around the room like a shared intimacy. He cracks a joke, stumbles over a line on purpose, takes a sip from his ever-present glass. The audience roars. They adore him. He is Dino, the lovable drunk, the carefree crooner, the man who made it all look so easy. This was the persona, the masterpiece of character acting that was Dean Martin. A character so convincing it fooled everyone, even at times himself. But let's pull back the velvet curtain. Let's step into the blinding, clinical whiteness of a film set earlier that same year. It's the set of Rio Bravo, the classic Western with John Wayne. Between takes, Wayne, the epitome of rugged American effort, watches Dean. He sees the truth the Copa Room audience misses. Dean isn't lounging, he's studying. His script is annotated, his timing meticulous. When the director calls action, Dean nails his take in one, maybe two attempts. Flawless. Then he retreats to his chair, picks up his joke glass filled with apple juice and slips the mask back on. John Wayne would later say in that gravelly voice, Dean's the hardest working man in Hollywood. He just doesn't want anyone to know it. That was the first fracture in the beautiful facade, the effort behind the ease, the lonely, intense focus hiding behind the smile. He built a castle of nonchalance on a foundation of pure discipline. But why? Why create a persona that painted you as indifferent when you were anything but? The answer lies in a deeper wound, in a past he spent a lifetime outrunning. Let's go further back to the true beginning. Steubenville, Ohio, the 1920s, a town of steel mills and smoke, of immigrant dreams and hard knocks. Born Dino Paul Crosty, the son of an Italian barber. The language at home was a Bruzzese dialect, not English. He was an outsider before he knew what the word meant. Kids mocked his clothes, his accent. He dropped out of school in the 10th grade, his principal telling him he'd never amount to anything. He worked the steel mills, his lungs filling with soot. He dealt blackjack in backroom casinos run by the local mob, learning to read men's eyes, to calculate odds, to smile while keeping secrets. He boxed under the name Kid Crochet, taking punches for pay. Every one of these experiences etched a lesson into his soul. The world is a tough crowd. You either get laughed at or you make them laugh first. You either feel the pain or you numb it. You either serve the powerful or you become so valuable they can't touch you. Young Dino Crosty chose survival, and the tool he forged was charm. A disarming, effortless charm that made people forget the steel in his gaze. The music was his escape. He sang in bands copying his idol Bing Crosby, but he was no Crosby. Crosby was mainstream America, apple pie and cozy hearths. Dean's voice carried the melancholy of the old country, the loneliness of the outsider. It was too different, so he teamed up with a manic, screaming comic named Jerry Lewis. It was alchemy. The handsome, smooth crooner and the chaotic, childish idiot, Martin and Lewis. They exploded. They became the biggest stars in the world. Nightclubs, radio, television, films. It was a hurricane of fame, money, and adulation, but look closer at the film reels. Watch Dean's eyes during the chaos. When Jerry is destroying a set, climbing the curtains, squealing with manic energy, the camera often cuts to Dean. He's smiling, yes, but his eyes are somewhere else. They are calm, watchful, almost sad. He was the straight man, the anchor, and an anchor feels the weight of the entire ship. The partnership was a gold mine, but for Dean, it was also a gilded cage. He was playing second fiddle to a lunatic genius, his serious musical talent sidelined for pratfalls. The studio loved it. The public loved it. But the boy from Steubenville, who'd fought so hard to be taken seriously, was being told his greatest value was as a foil. The fracture widened. In 1956, he did the unthinkable. He walked away from Martin and Lewis, the most successful partnership in show business. He let it shatter. The press called it a tragedy, a betrayal. They painted Jerry as the heartbroken genius and Dean as the ungrateful, greedy partner. The mob, which had heavy investments in their nightclub acts, wasn't happy. There were whispers of threats, of pressures applied. But Dean walked. It was the first public crack in his easygoing persona. It was an act of profound, terrifying will. He was 38 years old and the world expected him to fade away. Instead, he reinvented himself. As a solo singer, with heartbreakingly beautiful albums like Sleep Warm. As a serious actor in films like The Young Lions, holding his own against Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift. And then, as the cornerstone of the Rat Pack. The Summit at the Sands. Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, Joey Bishop, and Dean. They were the kings of cool, the swinging symbols of a new era. On stage, it was chaos, inside jokes, ad-libs. Martinis and smoke. Dean was the beloved, tipsy uncle of the group, but off-stage the dynamics were colder, more complex. Sinatra was the boss, the chairman. His temper was legendary, his loyalty fierce, and his disfavor a professional death sentence. Dean was the only one who could defy him, the only one Sinatra needed. When the room would tense under Frank's fury, Dean would dissolve it with a single, perfectly timed, lazy joke. He was the release valve, but that role came at a cost. It required constant vigilance, a perpetual mediation between his own pride and the volatile ecosystem around Sinatra. He was living in a gilded pressure cooker, where one wrong move, one misplaced joke, could unravel everything. And through it all there was the glass. The prop, the companion, the character note. Dino was always drinking. The public bought it completely. It was the core of his relaxed charm. But the people closest to him, they knew a different story. His son, Dean Paul Martin, would later say his father would often nurse a single drink all night. The drunk was a masterpiece of theatrical business. He'd slur a word, stumble a step, but his timing was always impeccable, his musical phrasing flawless. The drunker Dino acted, the more in control Dean actually was. It was the ultimate shield. Who could blame a lovable drunk for forgetting a name? Who could hold a tipsy crooner responsible for a cutting remark? The glass was his barrier from the world, from the demands, from the pain of his own past. But here is the tragic, unspoken truth that everyone missed. When you pretend to be numb for decades, the pretense can become reality. The performance can hollow out the performer. The 1960s rolled on. He had it all. The hit TV show, The Dean Martin Show, which he treated with the same casual brilliance, often reading his cue cards for the first time on air and making it part of the joke. More films, more records, more money than he could ever spend. A gorgeous family home in Beverly Hills. He was a national monument, but monuments are cold and they are lonely. His marriage to his second wife, Jean, was strained. A distant partnership of separate wings and silent dinners. His children saw an affectionate but remote figure, often gone, and when home, hiding behind a newspaper or the glow of a television screen. The man who could command the love of thousands with a wink seemed incapable of bridging the intimate distance in his own home. The charm that disarmed strangers became a wall that kept loved ones out. And then, the cracks in the National Monument began to show in public. June 1968. The Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, a political fundraiser for Bobby Kennedy. Dean is on stage singing. The room is full of hope of a new political dawn, and then a disturbance in the crowd. Someone shouts. Dean, ever the professional, tries to smooth it over with a joke. "Hey, you're heckling me in the wrong place, pal. Wait till I'm in a nightclub." The crowd laughs nervously, but the disturbance grows. It's a fight, a serious one. And Dean Martin, the unflappable, cool as ice king of cool, freezes. His smile vanishes. His eyes lock not on the scuffle but on a specific point in the crowd. His face goes pale. He stops singing. He simply stands there, microphone in hand, a statue of dread. Seconds tick by, an eternity on live television. He finally mumbles an excuse and walks off stage. It was utterly unlike him. The papers the next day mentioned the fight, but not Dean's strange, catatonic reaction. What did he see in that crowd that stole his voice? It wasn't just a fight. Some believe he saw a face from Steubenville, a face that represented a debt, not of money, but of silence. A ghost from the blackjack tables had just walked into the ballroom of his new life. The tragedies began to mount, personal and profound. In 1969, his son Dean Paul Dino, a golden boy, a rising tennis star and actor, was killed instantly when his Air National Guard fighter jet crashed into a mountain. The loss was catastrophic. Dean, the master of suppressed emotion, was seen publicly weeping only once at the funeral. Then he shut down completely. He retreated further into his shell, into the routine of work and the isolation of his home. The glass in his hand, once a prop, now seemed to contain something real, something meant to dull a pain too sharp for even his acting skills to mask. His beloved mother, to whom he was devoted, passed away. Then Frank Sinatra, in a fit of pique over a business deal, publicly disowned him, calling him a dumb Italian in the press. The friendship, the bedrock of his professional life for 15 years, was severed. Each loss was a pillar of his world crumbling. And with each one, Dean Martin seemed to grow quieter, smaller, more detached. Which brings us back to that velvet booth in the Polo Lounge. March 5, 1976, the phone call. For years, the source of that call has been one of Hollywood's most closely guarded secrets, but through whispers from aides, from old bookers who have since passed, a story emerged. The call was not from a friend, not from a family member. It was from a man with no name, speaking on behalf of interests from the old days. The Steubenville days. The message was a reminder. A settlement, long believed to be resolved, was being revisited. A silent partnership, forged in the desperation of youth, had come due with compound interest, and the currency wasn't money. It was a final, total performance of loyalty, a command, and it involved the very stage he was about to walk onto at the MGM Grand. Dean sat in that booth and saw the entire architecture of his life for what it was, a beautiful, elaborate fiction built on a single, hidden compromise made by a scared kid from Ohio. The carefree crooner, the king of cool, the man who made it all look so easy. It was all a cover story for a bargain he could never escape. The persona had been a prison of his own devising, and the warden had just called to remind him he owned the keys. He drove himself to the MGM Grand, 5,000 people buzzing with excitement. The orchestra struck up his intro. The curtain parted, and Dean Martin walked to the center of the stage. He stood there in the blinding spotlight and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. He didn't smile. He didn't raise a glass. He didn't make a joke. He simply opened his mouth and nothing came out. For a full minute, Dean Martin stood in utter silence. The crowd waited, thinking it was a new bit, the ultimate in relaxed cool. But the look on his face wasn't relaxation. It was devastation. It was the look of a man who has just seen the ghost of his own life pass before him. Finally, he spoke, not in song, but in a flat, hollow tone that carried to the back of the room. "I'm sorry," he said. "I just can't do this anymore." And he walked off. He left the building, got in his car, and drove home. He never performed publicly again. Overnight, the career of Dean Martin was over. The papers called it a breakdown, exhaustion, a mystery. The studio tried to spin it, saying he was taking a well-earned rest. But inside the industry, the whispers were different. They spoke of a settling of accounts, of old ghosts. The man who had spent 50 years building an empire on charm and ease had been destroyed not by a scandal the public could see, but by a secret only he could hear. The tragedy that ended Dean Martin's career wasn't a single event. It was the cumulative weight of a life spent pretending. The boy from Steubenville finally had to pay the price for the deal he made to leave it. The debt was his own authenticity, and the final payment was his voice. He lived another 19 years, a recluse in his Beverly Hills home. He watched old movies, saw few people. When his old friend Frank Sinatra years later tried to reconcile, Dean reportedly listened on the phone, said nothing, and gently hung up. The connection to that world was severed. He died on Christmas Day, 1995. The obituaries celebrated the carefree crooner, the drunk who wasn't, the man who made it all look easy. They cemented the legend. They buried the truth. Because the real story of Dean Martin is the story of the greatest performance in Hollywood history. A performance so convincing, it fooled the world. A performance that required him to hide his intelligence, his work ethic, his pain, and ultimately, the secret shackles he carried from a life he thought he'd escaped. He wasn't killed by fame or failure. He was slowly, methodically erased by the character he created to survive it. The tragedy was not that his career ended overnight. The tragedy was that it had to exist at all. He built a monument to ease and spent a lifetime trapped inside its cold, beautiful walls. In the end, the only way out was silence. A silence that speaks louder than any of his songs ever could. This is Hollywood Untold Files. We don't just tell stories. We excavate the ones they buried. And if you're still listening, you understand why some truths can't be allowed to die with the men who lived them. If you believe in preserving these echoes, these warnings from the past, then stay with us. Subscribe. Because for every legend they sell you, there's a real person they had to hide. And their stories are the only maps we have through the minefield of fame.